So this is the second video on continuity of consciousness, which is how do we remain continually conscious or aware of who we really are. So the question arises, who am I? Who am I trying to be continually conscious of? Am I continually conscious of just myself as an isolated individual who is motivated primarily by power, pleasure, and money? I need lots of money so I can escape pain, so I can have more pleasure. And as I get more pleasure, that feels really good. I want to be sure I'm not going to have any pain, so I need more power so I can make sure other people don't try and slice their way into my stuff, my pleasure, my rights, my liberties. And so long as I stay the head honcho, I stay the one on top, I stay the one with the power, and you don't get in my way, it's all great. But if you do, then I either have to get away from you, get rid of you, I don't want to have to deal with you. And this is all a very materialistic view, and it's not too hard to see when we get saturated in this, or the overall environment that is saturated in this. Just take a moment and observe in a day the movies, the TV, the songs, the things for sale as you walk down a street. How much of it is about somebody having power over somebody? How much of it is about the allures of pleasure in different realms? How much of it is about getting money? And that will tell you how many of us believe that we are simply the personality, the local self. But sometimes things don't always go the way that we want them to, and we may be humble. And what we usually start out doing is pleading to the higher self, which appears to be separate from the lower self, the local self. We appeal to that higher self to help us, to get us back on track, to rid us of the pain that we're feeling, to bring back maybe more power or money or pleasure so that we can get back to, ironically in a way, the old self of the local self. So we placate to the higher self, not to shift our consciousness into realizing I am that higher self, I am that peaceful self, but rather as a way to get us back to our old ego habits in the local self. But when that consciousness shifts, we will start to realize, no, it's not a higher self. It's I am that self. I am that. I am that peaceful self. And we start to cultivate the qualities of that peaceful self: harmlessness, compassion, a sense of connection with others, a desire to live a more moral and peaceful and generous life. And as we develop further that level of consciousness, we begin to shift again our sense of who I am into a more universal sense of consciousness, a universal self known as the monadic self, the quantum monad, the infinite self. Now here we're looking at the extended level of a model I presented many times, and it was in the last video. So what we want to look at now is the content of the consciousness of these different levels. What are we continually aware of? When we're aware of just the local self, we're going to be primarily absorbed with our physical needs, our physical environment, buying stuff to fill up our house with more furniture, buying more clothes to put on our bodies, making sure we've got a bigger, better house so we look more powerful than others, making sure that we have emotional pleasure primarily, though we'll swing from different emotions, from anger to happiness, to confusion, to jealousy, to sorrow. And what we have to do is learn how to master all these emotions. But as long as we're in the swing of these emotions, we're still within the local self. Same with the lower levels of the mind. So long as we're just thinking about the work that we have to do that day, or we're just processing a bunch of information from a class or the internet or Google, we're just having the chatter of the mind go on, which helps us to function in our everyday, but we're not getting beyond that. We're still pretty much focused in the local self. So where is your consciousness throughout the day? What are you primarily thinking about? What are you feeling? What is the relationship to your physical needs? If we are, without judgment, let's look at this. If we are primarily caught up in just everyday life and our high and low emotions and our physical realm and getting stuff, we are primarily in the local self, the personality, the ego, the sense of separation. But as we've been learning, as we start to shift our consciousness, we get into that higher state of the peaceful self, which takes us through, first and foremost in this model, the egoic lotus, the soul. Egoic means soul in this model, not selfish ego. It means soul. The lotus, to use an Eastern phrase of this symbolism, the mystic rose, to use a Western, more Christianized phrase of this symbolism. We start to unfold this soul petal, which is really 12 stages of cultivating more spiritual, peaceful, self-oriented qualities. And the more that we do that, we build this rainbow bridge, this Antakarana, and we start to move into the Buddhic plane. So called in a way because it has to do with Buddha, with a sense of having an enlightened way of being. That enlightened way of being has throughout the day thoughts of helping and serving others. We, in our minds, are primarily preoccupied with how can I help, not what can I get. We may still need to Google for information, but we do it for the sake of our service, for the sake of betterment of others. We strive to be more compassionate, more inclusive, more aware, awake, discerning about how to facilitate a greater sense of interconnection because we are aware of that interconnection with others. Emotionally, we're much more balanced. We have that equanimity. Whether pain arises or pleasure arises, it doesn't really matter. What matters most of all is that we keep the balance. We are at the eye of the storm. We're the peaceful self, no matter what arises. And as for our physical needs, to be honest, we start to limit them. Why? Because we just aren't caught up in the same need to acquire stuff. We realize that when we need what we need for the sake of service, it comes to us, and we have greater contentment. And so that is the level more of the peaceful self. It also includes the Atmic plane, which I don't comment on much in my video series, which is related to spiritual will. And then the universal self, which goes beyond into the monadic and the Adi plane of Adi. It goes beyond simply concern for the well-being of those in our planet and our world, but becomes truly more universal in your everyday consciousness. But what happens to most of us is we get caught up in states versus stages. In other words, as I explained in the other video, we get caught up in ways to get high, to get altered states or peak experiences, whether it's through drugs, meditation, sexual encounters, aha moments, catching the Holy Spirit, raising the Kundalini, getting Shakti or energy or empowered from somebody that really inspires us and zaps us, having peak performance in the way of sports or creativity. We get caught up in these states. And we don't understand the importance of stages. What is the difference with stages? These states lift us momentarily into a certain realm, but they don't necessarily anchor us in that realm. They don't necessarily change our consciousness. And what we want is a continuity of consciousness. We want to be continually aware at the level, at the stage of which we need to grow into next. So we can have an experience and we can pop through the tunnel and have a state and then come out of it and go right back into our same emotional mess. And the danger here is, instead of doing the practices that will help us really clean up those emotions and stabilize and purify these emotions so that we're the master of these emotions, we may get reliant upon states to take us there. And we don't really grow in the way of stages. We can also pop out maybe back into the mental plane. So we have a really wonderful experience through meditation. Some people may use drugs, a sexual encounter, and we think, oh, I'm just one with everybody. I'm so at peace. Oh, this is so great. And then when it's over, we're right back to the same mental chatter that just goes on and on and on. And is primarily focused in us. Our day, what we need to acquire to feel better, our money, our security. Oh, how can we get the next high or fix? How can we get more power? Like having sexual prowess so we can have power over other people. I mean, there's just so many examples, la, 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 that just go on at this ego selfish level that we're right back into. That's why if we really want to know where we're at, we can't focus on the different experiences we've had through states. We have to look at where our consciousness continually resides throughout the day and even throughout the night. What is the percentage of where we really are in the way of what is preoccupying our thoughts, our emotions, our actions? If we're lucky, we stabilize, and through those different state experiences, which are not bad or good, it's just how we use them to grow into the next stage versus just get distracted into wanting to get high all the time in states and not grow. So we can perhaps come back out in that Buddhic plane level, which, as I mentioned before, we truly are stabilizing ourselves. We're growing up, we're maturing, and we're really training our consciousness throughout the day and even throughout the night to be oriented towards love, service, compassion, understanding, giving, selflessness, all of these qualities. And we have the Buddhic discernment and awareness to not just wish to serve, but to know how to serve. And that's a big distinction in the Buddhic plane as well. So if you've been following my videos, you've seen me mention these 5 types of brain waves before. And these are important now in regards to states, understanding states. The usual brainwave state is beta, our everyday waking consciousness. We're busily engaged in activities and conversation. But it says nothing about the stage when we're activating that beta. The stage is reflecting the consciousness, the preoccupation of the consciousness while we're busily engaged in activities and conversation. Is that consciousness primarily local self? I'm doing all these activities so I can get more money, pleasure, and power? Or is it more soul, non-local self, peaceful self, where I'm doing this as a way to serve and uplift and heal and help? You see the difference in conscious focus. And what we want to achieve in continuity of consciousness is we want the conscious focus to abide or remain primarily in the peaceful self. In my videos, I'm not going into the higher levels of the universal self at this time. I'm focused primarily on the peaceful self. That's hard enough for most of us. But when we want to go into an altered state of consciousness, we can start to go into alpha, where the brain waves slow down about 8 to 12 cycles per second, and the mind starts to relax, get a little more dreamy, drifty. Some meditation practices are focused here in the beginning stages of meditation, usually, and we start to feel kind of like in a good altered state. Alcohol can get you here, marijuana can get you here, but again, none of this says anything about the stage we're in. We can get a nice buzz through alcohol and go into an alpha state, or have a nice relaxing meditation in alpha state, and it doesn't necessarily change our consciousness when we come out of it. What we want to do is use states to help us stabilize at new stages of growth and development. Then there's theta, 4 to 7 cycles per second as we're drifting off into sleep or getting into deeper meditation, and delta, where we're actually asleep. Some say it's 3 to 5 cycles per second. Some say it's 0 to 3. And here's the trick. What usually happens is as we go into theta and delta, we become unconscious. The continuity of consciousness breaks. We go to sleep, we forget about our lives, we forget about ourselves, whether it's our individual local self or whether it's our peaceful self. We just forget about it for a while, go to sleep until we come back out and go through theta, alpha, back into beta. And at times, we can also go into gamma. Now, the state of gamma is a hyper-learning, super creative, in the zone state, which starts to access the whole of the brain. And as it does, we are developing a capacity for higher levels of continuity of consciousness, and also the higher stages, which can help us develop compassion and empathy. So it is possible to have continuity here, to be in an active beta state and have, while we're in it, remembrance of who we are as the peaceful self. To access a gamma state where we get really in the now, really in the present moment, and intuition is just really working and everything is really productive, and we're doing that primarily for the service of others. Or we can break the consciousness, and as we go beta, alpha, we have a nice little high, nice little trip, nice little state. Theta and delta, we forget who we are, and we're out of it again. So the trick is whether we are in a waking state, using various practices like meditation throughout the day to help us stabilize at the next level, possibly through states that effectively used help us stabilize at new stages of growth and development, or whether we are in a sleeping state. We want to 24/7 have an awareness as to who we really are, and to stabilize that awareness into the next stage so we can continually hold that level as much as possible at all times. That is the difference in regards to continuity of consciousness. First and foremost, we have to know who we are and what is the consciousness of that identity of who we are. And how do we stabilize ourselves so that we grow into that stage of consciousness? That's what continuity of consciousness is really all about. So, how do we do that? How do we stabilize and get to continuity of consciousness at a new stage? One method is through the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and I have a series of videos on that, including meditations. Another is through the Peaceful Self process that I offer. Or perhaps as you go through these videos, you recognize the similarities in your own tradition that you're practicing. Regardless of which way you are choosing to use, the following slides express a little bit about the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali series that I offer, who I am, and how to reach me.